Imagine sitting in a classroom where your child finds it challenging to stay focused, while the rest of the class progresses smoothly through their lessons. This is a reality many parents face when their child has been diagnosed with ADHD. Now add to that the added layer of cultural expectations and challenges, and you get a sense of the unique hurdles that Black parents face. What's going on, OG family? Welcome to a new episode of The Opportunity Gap. I'm your host, Julian. Today's episode delves into a topic that's both deeply personal and incredibly relevant: raising a Black child with ADHD. We're thrilled to have Dion Chavis join us to share his insights and experiences. Dion is a dedicated advocate and father with ADHD. Dion is the host of Black People Parenting, an incredible podcast that we'll actually be sharing an episode of in today's show notes for today's show. Dion is also the force behind Dads in the Class, which we'll discuss later in the show. Welcome to the show, Dion.
Thank you, good brother. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad to be in this space with you.
I appreciate you. We got to chop it up a little bit before we started recording, talking about music and mutual love of the original Jay-Z albums. But I would love to know, we always start off our episodes asking our guests, what's bringing you joy right now? What's bringing you joy in your life?
Oh man, that's a great question. I think one of the things that brings me joy in this moment, of course, we're in back to school season. So my daughter is 20, my son is 6. I got them on both sides of the spectrum. I call them the bookends. I take as many prayers and kind words as I can get, thought prayers, all that.
You got it.
So today was actually my son's first day of first grade. And my daughter, today is her second day of her junior year of college. So I would say right now, this space that I'm in, I get joy from watching them journey into their next chapters. Watching my son, who's on the autism spectrum, mature, and watching him grow throughout the summer and be excited about going into the first grade, and watching my daughter, who is a junior in college, and watching her, navigate this new landscape of being a quasi-adult, I guess you could call her. But, just watching her really navigate the space of becoming a responsible young adult, but still like needing me, but not needing me like that. It's really, really dope.
So let's jump into it. Today, audience, we're going to be talking a lot about parenting kids with ADHD. And we talk a lot about ADHD on the program. Raising a child with ADHD presents so many unique challenges, but opportunities, right? We don't want to just frame it in the negative. We focus on both ends, and there's so many opportunities. For Black families specifically, these challenges can be compounded by additional layers of cultural and systemic factors. So we asked Dion to come on to really share his experience and share his expertise. So Dion, tell the audience and us in general, what has parenting a child with ADHD looked like for you?
For me, my daughter, again, she's 20. So she went through her, I believe it was like half of her sophomore and junior years in high school during the pandemic. And it was right around that time, maybe a little bit before, when she got her diagnosis. So understanding what she was going through and having to show empathy is something that I had to learn how to do, particularly being in an environment of a pandemic. And, for us, like you said, for Black folks, ADHD isn't something that we grew up acknowledging.
Right.
Our parents didn't necessarily acknowledge ADHD or learning disabilities or autism spectrum for a lot of folks back in the 80s and 90s. So it was something that kind of took some adjustment in the way that I parented. So I had to kind of pivot in the way that I parented, and in the midst of the pandemic, and also we'll talk about it later, but not knowing that I was also suffering from, I don't want to say suffering from, but I was also experiencing or, would later down the line be diagnosed with ADHD. So it's been a learning experience. It's definitely been a lot of learning involved.
I mean, so many families discovered so many new things about themselves during this pandemic. And as I'm thinking about what it was like, sitting in the basement, trying to parent and trying to teach and trying to pay attention to the screen while our kids are, doing their schoolwork, I can only imagine how difficult it might have been to, receive this diagnosis in the midst of that. How did you know? Like, how did you know that something was going on, and what initial signs or challenges did you notice with your daughter that helped you decide to kind of go through this process?
Well, my daughter has always been extremely smart, right?
Okay.
But she's also been someone who has suffered from test anxiety throughout her entire life.
Okay.
And that's something that I've known about her, as a parent, as someone who guided her through elementary, middle, and high school. I've always known that she suffered from test anxiety. She's not a good test taker, whether it be standardized testing, whether it be, just test in history. She's just not a good test taker. She's made great grades, National Junior Honor Society, all of those things. But when it comes to testing, she's just not great at it.
Yeah, a lot of our listeners can relate to that, right?
Yeah, you become, almost empathetic to that when you see them. It's like I can't say that you're not studying. I can't say that you're not doing the work. I can't say that you're not putting in the effort, because you are. Like I'm right here with you, right? I'm right here going through these things with you. And like one of the signs for me, I think it might have been when she first got into high school. And I'm a history English guy, math and science. That's not my jam. History,
Same,
English,
same. Yep.
all day, right? So studying for those subjects almost came natural to me. So
Hmm.
she would tell me things like, she would excel in math and science, but when it came to like history, like she wouldn't get it. And to me, history is just like you're just memorizing like dates and events. Like
Right.
World War II was this date.
Hmm.
Columbus came to America on this day. Like, it's not really a lot of science to it. We were going over some stuff, getting her ready for a test, and like she didn't know how to study.
Mm.
And I was like, wait a minute. What do you mean you don't know how to study? So I gave her one of the techniques that I had learned in middle school. Like literally my middle school teacher, I remember her telling me, like, you put all of the information that you want to learn on the left side of the paper, you draw a line down the middle, and then you write the questions on the right side. And then you go through the questions down the line, and you should be able to answer the question. And if you can't answer it yet, you just take a peek at it and look at the answer on the left side of the paper. That's
That's
that, like
old
I'll
school
never
teaching. That's
old school.
Cornell. Okay.
That's just classic 80s and 90s
Yeah.
education. So
Exactly.
once, that kind of set off an alarm to me that there was something going on.
So as you went through this process, right? You get the diagnosis. You and your daughter kind of start to figure out what's next. How did you all, and especially again, as you said earlier, you and I are black men. We come from that same. I grew up in the 80s and 90s as well. We come from that same background of ADHD. It's not really a thing when we were kids. How did you navigate that now raising a daughter in this environment?
I navigated it with a lot of grace and empathy. Almost had to kind of walk on eggshells, but this is all new territory for me. This is all
Right.
totally new. This is I don't know anything about being diagnosed with ADHD. I don't know anything about being diagnosed with depression as a teenager. All of
Hmm.
these things are new to me. So I'm parenting, and a lot of it is trial and error, to be
Right.
honest with you. Like a lot of it
Listen,
is
that's parenting, right? Like I
right.
like to say, you got to fake it till you make it, and
Yeah,
that's
a
what
lot
it
of it is,
is.
yeah, pretending that you know what you're doing when you absolutely have no clue, right? And
Exactly.
just hoping and praying that you came up with the right resolution. So for me, it was really trying to be sure that I was giving her a lot of grace, because again, there were other things going on. And the bottom line is that for me, I wanted to be sure that I didn't lose my daughter to anything, right?
Right.
So being a little bit more lenient to her when she might have come home with a C on a test when I know she could have gotten an A or a B, right?
Hmm.
Or being a little bit more lenient when, she was a senior and her SAT scores weren't as high as I thought they could be,
Hmm.
right? All of that had to play into effect, because I'm looking at the whole child. I'm not just looking at one person. Yes, I want you to be the best you can be academically. Yes, I would love if you made all A's. Yes, I would love if you did all of these great things. But even if you don't, I'm still here to love you. I'm still here to be the safe landing for you when you need me to be. And I put that above any and everything else while still giving her the guidance, while still supporting her.
I'm wondering, just again from your perspective, what are some of the challenges that you may have encountered as you're trying to raise a child with ADHD? Like what are some of the things you had to deal with and had to figure out as a parent?
So I think the navigation portion for me specifically came with somewhat of an apprehension initially to her being on medicine. Right.
Mm,
I didn't object to it, but when it was brought to my attention, like when her doctor said, yeah, we may want to put her on, on this medicine, I'm like, wait a minute, hold up. Because that's just how we were taught.
right. It's funny. Our first episode of the Opportunity Gap was about is ADHD medicine a white people thing? Like that literally
Mm,
was the first episode we talked
mhm.
about.
Mhm. And I'll say this, so many things that happen in this world, in this country for and to black folks are rooted in white supremacy, right? But I think
Hmm.
it's important that we understand that even at the core, that apprehension is rooted in white supremacy because of the disparities in healthcare and particularly mental health care between black folks and white folks, right? we
Hmm.
don't we don't have the opportunity, right, for lack of a better word, to get the care and to get the treatment and to have a teacher sit down with our child and say, this is what's going on. I know, this child is acting. I think I listened to one of the episodes and you were talking about the school to prison pipeline.
Yep.
We go straight through the school to prison pipeline, right? There's no buffer.
I like that you called it out and just said exactly what it is. There's an individual level, but on a systemic level,
For sure.
this is a centuries old issue. So that's why I think this type of conversation is important because we're real people and we're experiencing this day to day. We spoke about your daughter at length, but I want to talk a little bit about you. So
Okay.
you, as a parent, you found out that you also have ADHD,
Yeah.
which obviously adds a giant layer of complexity to this journey that we're on with parenting. I'm interested to know, what was your reaction when you found out that you were diagnosed with ADHD?
So my reaction, it was, I don't know if I was surprised necessarily, but it was kind of like now it all makes sense. Like this is the aha moment. Now I get it, right? I worked in radio for 20 years as a radio personality. Of course, once the pandemic started, I ended up being laid off because
Mm,
advertisers aren't paying for, you know, spots and all of those things. Radio stations
right.
cut budgets. So I ended up getting a job as a project manager with a national nonprofit, very, very well known national nonprofit organization. And this was the first time that I had a job that required me to have deliverables. And there came a point where my productivity wasn't really what it should have been. And my manager calls me in and I just tell her, I said, I can't really, I'm having trouble concentrating. Like I'm working from home, but I'm having trouble concentrating. Like I'm supposed to be, you know, working and I've got this report due, but instead I'm like Googling how tall was Tupac. Oh, I need to
Go down
know.
the
Like
rabbit
I'm
hole, right? Yeah.
right. I'm looking up like how many points did Michael Jordan score against the Pistons in 1989? Like I just told her, I said, I'm struggling with some things in terms of my mental health. And, I've been in therapy. I've been in therapy for a couple of years. I
Mm.
talked to my therapist about it, and she suggested that I get tested for ADHD. She said, why don't you get tested for ADHD? Because what you're telling me sounds like that's what it is. So go to the psychiatrist and um, basically get tested. And I don't know the name of the test, but it seems like it's 100 pages long. And they ask you about your childhood and they ask you about what people would say about you and what type of student you were and how did you get work done and all of these things. And I'm answering the question. It's like a 3-part series over 3 days and meet with the woman and she says, well, according to the test, you have ADHD and a form of depression. And I said, okay. She said, well, do you find yourself like losing things a lot? I said, yeah, I couldn't tell you what my keys are right now.
Mm.
She said, do you find yourself just kind of like losing your train of thought? I said, yeah, while you're talking, I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to eat for dinner. And it just was all of these things, man. And it all just kind of came together as, oh, okay, this is why I lose things all the time. This is why I can't, keep track. This is why I walk into a room and can't remember what I came in here for. This is why I have 25 tabs open on Google Chrome, right? All of these things. Now it just makes sense to me.
Wow. One, thank you. I mean, I've been asking you some pretty personal questions, so I just have to put that out there. Thank you
For sure.
for just being real about what your experience has been. But Understood has another podcast that talks all about adults who are diagnosed with ADHD,
Mhm.
and so many of the stories mirror your own, where these things that have been happening in your life, your entire life, and you didn't know why. Like you just kind of, this is who I am. This is what it is. Some people mask it. Some people use coping mechanisms. Some
Mhm.
people get super organized because they know that they struggle with these basic things. And having this diagnosis, it just opens up to make you realize, wait, now I know why.
Yeah.
Now I
Yeah.
understand why. And I imagine you've used the word empathy a bunch of times in this conversation. When you speak with your daughter, now that you've gotten this diagnosis, does it change anything?
The only thing that I would say that it's changed is that now we have a common bond,
Mm.
right? So now we bond over this thing that we have in common, right? Because of course we know ADHD is genetic, right? So
Hmm.
more than likely she probably got it from me.
Right.
I just found out that I had it at 40, 43 or 44 years, probably 43 years old. She was fortunate enough to find out that she had it as a teenager. I think that the conversations that this has allowed me to have, it's made it easier because I can relate to her now. I relate to her even more. I would probably say, when I look back, if I were to look back at and compare where she was in high school and middle school and how she performed and where I was and how I performed in middle school and high school and how I kind of managed like organizing and things like that. Like I wasn't right. I didn't.
Hmm.
I had a trapper keeper. I don't know if your listeners know what a trapper keeper is, but I had a trapper keeper every year, and I can
I always wanted one,
you
but
never had a trapper keeper. Oh man,
well, no,
you
mom,
gotta
she
get
never bought me one. I always wanted. Mom, if you listening, sorry, I'm not trying to play you, but
trapper
you never
keeper.
bought me the trapper keeper.
Look, so my joints, they were like by the second, third week of school, they were never organized. Like you would go into the school year with every subject and every folder and boom, boom, boom. I would have science and the social studies folder and math and it would just be all over the place. And that's just things that I remember like right now, right?
Right.
My daughter, on the other hand, I can remember when she was around that same age, she was a bit more organized. But of course, back, at that point, they didn't have to bring books home and all of that
Hmm.
stuff. So it was a little bit different. But I know that she was a bit more organized than I was at that age. So now, even as an adult, like I have to be mindful to put my keys in a certain place or put my wallet in a certain place, or I have to implement tools to help me. Like I have the thing in my wallet that you can't find it. The Apple AirTag in my wallet that I use to help me and on my keys. So helping her to navigate through the journey has been kind of therapeutic for me because I know what she's going through and I can have more grace and more empathy for her because I know that like it's something that she is struggling with at times.
Right. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you and I are about the same age group. We have the same references at least. And 44, I'm 42, so we're close. And when I find myself when I'm out with my boys, whether we go catching a game somewhere or we just at the bar together, doing whatever, we're always talking about our kids, right?
Mhm.
We wind up somehow the conversation circles back to our kids and the different things that we're dealing with.
That's how you know
And
you washed. Washed. highlight of your night is conversing about your kids.
No,
Washed.
no, no. We're not watched yet. Don't say it. Don't say it.
Hey man, listen, I'm accepting of it. I already know. Like
Yeah, I guess you're
washed.
right. I guess you're right. But I'm asking because, for me, I really think it's the value of friendship at this stage in life is so important. And, I have longtime brothers that, we've been friends 30 years, 20, going way, way back. And a lot of times I find myself like talking about some of the struggles that I'm dealing with as a parent, or we might just be chopping up. Same thing. We might talk about sports and then we jump right into, man, I got to deal with this, or my son did this today. And then somebody might talk about what their therapist told them or
Mhm.
whatever. I'm wondering, is it the same for you where you've shared some of your experiences with your boys? Like, do y'all kind of chop it up together like that too? Or
For sure.
is it something you keep like to yourself?
No, no, no. So for me, I always tell my guys like I'm the sacrificial lamb, right? Because my daughter is the oldest out of like all of the kids in my direct friend group. I tell
Okay.
them I go through what I go through and I come and tell you so you'll be prepared for it when you go through it, right?
Got it.
I'm here and I give this information willingly because I know how hard it can be. I know how much of a struggle it can be for us to navigate because quite honestly black men we don't have a lot of safe spaces at times, right?
Mhm.
Oftentimes we don't feel like we can have certain conversations about certain things. So I think it's important that we normalize these types of conversations, not just about our kids but about like what emotions are we feeling, right? How is it affecting us? Like how are we coping with certain things? Are we coping with these things in a healthy way? Because if you're my man and I know you're going through something and you tell me that you're coping with it in a way that's unhealthy, then it's my
Mhm.
responsibility to call you out on that, right? I really just want us to be healthy, man, and mentally in a space where we can help each other as much as we can.
I think that's a perfect segue into the real reason that I brought you on. I want to hear about dads in the class. Can you tell us just where did it come from? What
Yeah.
is it? Tell us about it. Dads in the class.
So dads in the class it's my new baby, honestly. So with my daughter, I noticed that while I was highly engaged in her education growing up, all through elementary, middle school, I moved from Virginia to North Carolina just so I could be closer to my daughter. I walked her into school on the first day every year up until middle school. Once she got into middle school, it was a little different. She wasn't as cool to have your pops
You want to
walk
be
you
with
into class
dad?
in middle school. But, up until then, every year we're there. So I was always engaged and I've done work through, what I was doing with the radio. I would go out to schools and, mentor kids and I would talk to principals and I've done work in fatherhood for years. But what I would notice is that there was a disconnect in two things in the number of dads who were also engaging, in their kids' education, but
Hmm.
also in how I was, I don't want to say treated, but how I felt going into the classroom as one of few dads, right? Because it just felt different. It didn't always feel warm and welcoming. It didn't always
Right.
feel like I was the dad who was putting in as much effort as I was. And, quite honestly, I put in a lot of work. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like summertime, we going through flashcards and workbooks and all of these things, but it didn't feel like it was necessarily a welcoming environment all the time. So once I got laid off from the radio station, I started doing more public speaking, started traveling and stuff like that. But within the last year or so, I decided to create an initiative to help schools understand the importance of engaging with fathers and help them create strategies to engage with fathers because the way that you engage with dad may not always be the same as you're engaged with mom, right?
Right.
And a lot of the family engagement in our schools, it is very mom centric. It is very
Hmm.
based on, how can I connect with mom? I've even had a teacher say to me, well, I told the teacher something, and well, what does mom have to say? Well, I'm dad. So,
I'm right here.
if
Yeah.
I'm right here. So, I want to be sure that and it's almost a level of cultural competency because you
Hmm.
have to be conscious of the way that you are connecting with these dads. the data is there that shows that when dads are involved when in their kids' education, the kids are less likely to drop out of school. They're more likely to make all A's and B's, less likely to engage in risky behaviors and things
Hmm.
like that. It would be wise for schools to do everything that they can do to get fathers engaged in the school. So I've taken that initiative. I turned it into a podcast. The podcast is something where I talk to not just dads, but I talk to just people in education about family engagement, about how we can connect with kids, about literacy, about like how to navigate the IEP process, all of these things, just because I am a dad and I know a lot of times for us, we're going into these situations naive and we don't have an
Right.
understanding because whatever apprehension we might have about the school system, right? Because we don't feel
Mhm.
welcomed or because of the fact that we might have come up in a time where the schools were not favorable for us. So I feel like the more knowledge we as parents have, the more knowledge educators have on how to connect with dads or how to connect with kids using hip hop and pop culture, the better off we'll be. So I just kind of use dads in the class as a focal point to kind of bring all those things together.
I love it. I absolutely love it. I mean, it's a lot of the same things that we talk about on this podcast. I mean, we're kind of the same boat in terms of really giving access to the information that's needed and
Hmm.
breaking it down in a way where people can understand. So I really love the fact that dads in the class is being proactive about giving some of those strategies
Yeah.
and trying to help out. I'm interested to know, do you have any success stories or impactful moments from the initiative?
So for dads in the class, it is something that we are just getting off the ground this school year. But
Okay.
I have worked in fatherhood and worked with schools pre dads in the class. It just wasn't under that name. There was a school in Michigan that I worked with some years ago, and they were having trouble getting dads engaged. And I kind of went in almost as a consultant, almost just to kind of see what they were doing and to see how they were handling dads. And it was nothing spectacular. I'll be honest with you. They were just scheduling PTA meetings and things at not PTA meetings, parent teacher conference. I'm sorry, without any regard to like dad schedules or the fact that a lot of dads work or they can't come to events during the day, right? Like a lot of dads, we aren't off until 5 or 6 o'clock. So I kind of gave them some things and some tips that I thought that they could do. And I talked to some dads in that school community and just kind of gave them what I felt like would be some good tips, and they implemented those things over the
Mm,
course of that next school year, and they saw engagement from dads increase drastically just by making small changes, just by
mm,
doing things like a dad's reading corner, or leaving a note for the dads in the school newsletter, or asking
mm,
the dads when they come in, what's your preferred method of communication? Like, are you a texter, or are you a person who actually talks on the phone?
mm.
Just making those small things or doing those things, like you said, like a chili cook off. I think those things make a world of difference, man. And I've been just, traveling the country over these last few years and connecting with schools.
What advice would you give to other fathers or parents who are struggling, whether it's how to advocate for their child's needs or just how to parent a child with ADHD? What
Yeah.
advice do you have?
I think that the first piece of advice that I would have, I think that we have to parent our children for the world that exists now, not the world that existed, I'll say pre 2020,
Mm,
but even pre, you know, going back to when we were growing up, right? Because that
right.
world of, the 80s and 90s of no technology, no social media, no cell, that world don't exist no more. Like
Nope.
it's gone. It's
Hmm.
long gone. So if you think you are going to parent your child the way that your parents raised you and be successful, I'm not saying that you won't. I'm saying that it's going to be a whole lot of challenges, as
Mm,
opposed to you shifting your mindset and accepting the fact that the world has changed. The
hmm.
pandemic put this world upside down, and we are still trying to find our way back from it, right?
Hmm.
But even before that, it was a different world. But if you are parenting a child with ADHD, if you are parenting a child with depression, if you are parenting a child who is on the autism spectrum, who you suspect might have autism, you can't be afraid of meeting that child where they are, getting them what they need, and not caring about labels, because labels don't do anything for anybody, right? The
Mm,
important thing is, what are you doing to get that child what they need in the moment that they're in? That's our job, to give them
mm.
what they need while they're in that particular moment. That's what we can do. And that's really the advice that I have.
Brother, I could talk to you all day. I just can't thank you enough for sharing your
Sure.
experiences, sharing who you are, sharing your family, sharing your whole self, your journey through parenting, and your advocacy. Really, like really deciding not just to talk about it, but you're doing something about it. It's inspiring. And I learned a lot tonight. So, just from me to you, you're doing really important work. And I appreciate that.
Thank you, good brother. I appreciate it. I was raised by a strong Black woman. I just want to shout out my mom, man. I know she's going to watch this at some point. I'll be sure to send it to her. But I do these podcasts and I do these things, and I never shout her out. So I want to be sure to shout my mom out and show her some love, man. I wouldn't be
Okay.
here. None of this would even be possible without the love of and guidance of my mother.
Well, I got to say the same. Shout out to Michelle Saavedra. Mom, you already know. You already know. She does listen to these, so she knows.
Every episode, I'm sure.
So, how can the audience get involved with or learn more about dads in the class? Like how
For
do they
sure, they
where do
can.
they find you? Where do they go?
If you are an educator, a school district leader, a principal, you can book me to speak. You can book me to speak. I do professional development. I do keynote. I do workshops. Feel free to reach out to me, Dion, Dion, at Dion Chavis, CHAV as in Victor, IS.com. On social media at Dion the Glad Dad. On Instagram and on Facebook, it is at the Glad Dad.
The Glad Dad. Y'all hear that? The Glad Dad. Check it out. Check it out. I mentioned earlier in the show we'd be sharing an episode from Dion's podcast, Black People Parenting. The episode is Mastering Tantrums and Meltdowns, Strategies for Parents of Black Children. That is a real one. Listen to it. It is incredible. Y'all check it out and let me know what you think. Like, let us know, because we want to share more resources like this. I listened to it and it is fire. OG family, be sure to check out some additional resources from today's episode on the Opportunity Gap page on understood.org. That wraps our episode for today. We hope you found this discussion both informative and empowering. I know I did. Until next time, family. Thanks so much for listening today. We love hearing from our listeners, so if you have any thoughts about today's episode, you can email us at opportunitygap@understood.org. And be sure to check out the show notes for links and resources to anything we mentioned in the episode. This show is brought to you by understood.org. Understood is a nonprofit organization dedicated to empowering people with learning and thinking differences, like ADHD and dyslexia. The Opportunity Gap is produced by the Tara Drinks and edited by Daniela Teo Garzon. Our theme music was written by Justin D. Wright, who also mixes the show. Ash Beecher is our supervising producer. Brianna Barry is our production director. Neil Drumming is our editorial director. Our executive directors are Laura Key, Scott Kocher, and Seth Melnick. Thanks again for listening.